just sell small rectangular objects. They're called books.
Welcome to episode 56 of Unlocking Great Books.
This one is going to be a brilliant podcast.
Yeah. So today, what
we're doing Thorstein Veblen's The Theory of the Leisure Class.
Okay, and I'm going to just open the cover on this, maybe to give a bit of a sense of what we're talking about today.
Yeah. So subtitle is An Economic Study of Institutions.
And bear with me if you. Well, I've just got a little tune here that I'd like to play. So this is kind of the gist of what we're talking about today. Right. Thanks for the.
What's the name of that song?
I Got Money.
By?
50 Cent.
Right, so I Got Money, 50 Cent is a great intro into the theory of the leisure classes by
well, we need to give it a
Veblen.
modern tinge because we're talking about around 1900 here with this book. And,
in this podcast, we're going to talk about why this is such an important book and a way this has shaped our thinking in ways you might not even know. Not only has it shaped your thinking in ways you might not know, but the ideas in this book seem incredibly pertinent in 2025.
So quick origin story on why this has landed in our podcast reading. You've taught this book before, and it is widely recognised as one of those really important books. So, we bounce around. Like last week we were doing the bestseller from recent times.
Yeah, this is an important book, capital I. It's a great book, capital G.
Yeah.
We're going to discuss whether we think it's a good book.
Good book,
because I think we're going to point out that even though it's all of those things we just said, which give it a timeless quality, a lot of the book feels like it's rooted in its time.
Yes.
You're
going to it's important to understand that time.
You're going to talk a lot about the context it was written in. We're going to talk about the context of Veblen's family, like great American success story, American dream. Yeah. But some of those things might be legacy.
Yeah.
We're also going to talk about, what do you do with a book this long and this dense?
Ooh.
How much?
And a confession.
Well, look, let's leave it there and get on with it.
Books. I need my books.
We should start with
We always start with the author, but I think it's a really important place to start.
So Thorstein Veblen.
Yes.
Yeah, what do you know about Thorstein?
So we've got a very Norwegian name from what I worked out. But he's had a very interesting life, wasn't he? So Norwegian immigrant parents who moved to the US to find a better life. And they ended up on I'm trying to remember where they were. Was it Minnesota or
Michigan or somewhere like that?
Somewhere
rural. Dad's a carpenter, isn't he?
Yes, carpentry, construction, into a family farm.
Yep.
So very much a working background, and I think that's a really important little asterisk for later. But he went off to college, PhD from Yale.
Yes, yeah.
And then spent 7 years unemployed.
That's the bit I love.
Yes.
Think about that, a degree from an Ivy League, 7 years unemployed. And then how did he fix it? He went to graduate school at Cornell.
Yes.
Yeah, and then became an academic.
Yeah, so interesting guy. But I mean, the backdrop of his personal story. And then I found out that he lost all his money in stocks and raisins.
Yeah, I know.
So
I love it. Well, we're going to come back to that, right? But the thing that I thought about, so the book we're going to talk about, Theory of the Leisure Class, 1899.
Yes. So let's put this in the context of his life.
Well, before we do that, he lived from 1857
yes, I was just going to say
to
that.
1929.
Right, so this is almost smack bang.
Imagine the changes in the world that he experienced. 1857.
Yes.
I know he's a baby, a toddler, before the American Civil War.
Yeah, that's...
1929, after World War I and in the Great Depression. His life spanned that arc.
Yeah, and that's a really important note. So we're talking... So that marker of 1899, his life straddles that book.
Yeah.
And the fact that he did... So we talked about the PhD in 1884. Yeah. So he kind of started 7 years unemployed. So we're talking early 1890s. Yeah. And then about 7 or 8 years later, this book comes out. Yeah. So it's good to hold these things because it starts to explain a few things about the book. But the background is really, really important.
Yeah, and the economic time. Also the economic context of the 1890s, right? So
let's go back there. So the world in 1899 in terms of America. So the they talk about the. I think this is probably a good place to start, isn't it?
Yeah.
So it was the
Gilded Age.
the Gilded Age, and the end of the Gilded Age,
Yes.
and what gilding is related to gold, isn't
Yeah.
it? So we're talking about incredible economic growth.
Yeah.
Massive immigration, so which is relevant given he was a child of an immigrant family into the US. Political corruption.
Yes.
It reads like these modern times, doesn't it? It's incredible.
This is the point I'm going to make. Like, if you think about it, so yes, it's the Gilded Age, but part of the Gilded Age is these robber barons.
Yes.
These people who are extraordinary.
Now, I always hear these names, but I never knew what
Rockefeller.
they did. So Rockefeller was Standard Oil.
Yes.
Carnegie
was
Steel,
and then
Vanderbilt,
right.
which was rail and
Right,
ships.
yeah.
So these guys all
These
were
people may have been the richest people the world's ever seen, right?
Yes.
Millionaires in the 1890s.
colloquially known as the robber barons.
The robber barons. Not just rich, though, enormous political power.
Oh, 100%.
What does this sound like? An age of unprecedented wealth and political influence.
Incredible, isn't it? So, and this was, like if I was to try and paraphrase that time, so you've got this massive economic growth, but you've got this collision of industry and society, and what happens, and bang.
And
Yeah.
we should say completely 1%ers, right?
Oh,
Like,
totally.
Massive amounts of poverty.
Totally.
And no social.
So you go from these guys, I suppose, being, like the guys that put down the railroads,
Yeah,
the guys
yeah.
that, get industry cranking and making stuff and buildings and all that, and then all of a sudden, the Gilded Age was 20 or 30 years
Yeah.
of just golden years in the US.
Well, golden years for the really rich.
For the rich.
No, it's a good point.
So by the end of that, people are now going, oh, hang on.
That's a good point. So
Yeah.
you can
Timing
think
of the
Veblen's
book.
If you step back from Veblen's book. So Theory of the Leisure Classes, it's also called an economic study of institutions.
Yes.
What Veblen was essentially saying is conventional economic theory at that time was insufficient to account for the rapid change that was going on and
what happened.
what happens.
Yes.
So
we're talking about the economic growth, all that kind of stuff, but what happens? We end up with, this is the stuff that was around. Prohibition, urbanization, inequality and race issues, the rise of unions.
and
So all of these
he
forces.
touches on all of those, but of course what he's famous for is the notion of conspicuous consumption.
Yes.
Right. And that's the book's merit. That's the book's real strength. So interestingly, I found something out of the Wall Street Journal. You'll love this.
Oh, okay.
When we critique the book, we'll push back against this. But the WSJ said Thorstein Veblen may be the most important American thinker most Americans have never heard of.
Yep.
Now, if you're a sociologist, of course, you've heard of him. And Mike Grimm's screaming into the mic, into the.
Yes, Grimm's always screaming.
He's screaming
in the
into
background
the radio right now, saying,
of our
"I
podcast.
teach Veblen." Everybody knows about Veblen. If you're outside of sociology and economics, you might not know Veblen. But that point about not only is the world changing, but what seems to be incredibly irrational things are happening. People are spending fortunes on things which are not which are deliberately unproductive.
Yes,
which signal their wealth.
So this is that, like the simplistic, and I think this is the important thing, and you get back to Veblen's contribution, and if you've got to read around this book to understand how profound this principle was. But you said just before that if you've done sociology or you've studied in this space, you would have heard of Veblen.
Yeah.
But it's really important to note that at that time, sociology
did not exist.
It's
such a good point. Thank you for saying it, because Veblen saw himself as an economist, right?
So he studied economics, but what he did was bring in the
Social
principles
change.
of psychology, sociology, anthropology.
It's a really good point. Lots of people point to Durkheim and things like that as being the fathers of sociology, maybe even back to...
but I think he's the father of sociology and economics.
I'm agreeing with you, right?
Yes.
By bringing that broader lens to economics, he brings in what we would now call a sociological view.
Because up until that point, it seems like economics was... just the economy. The human element was not part of it.
But this is why it's so interesting, right? Because he's pointing to things which seem incredibly irrational, that seem inefficient, and which don't seem to support an argument for social progress.
Yeah, but now also it didn't allow for what was actually happening, did it? Which is the rise of unions and inequality and all those things. And he's going, hang on, there's a people element to
that's why
economics.
That's why he talks about So the theory of the leisure class is the bit that everybody knows, conspicuous consumption.
Yes.
We'll talk about that.
Yes.
It's the second part of the title, an economic study of institutions, which most of the book talks about, which hasn't dated particularly well.
However,
impetus,
for its time, it would have been...
And the impetus is what you're saying was great.
Yeah.
But what his actual analysis we'll come back to in a minute. The other point I want to make before we rip into his ideas. So this is one of those books everybody points to as a critical book.
Which is why we're doing it, isn't it?
Which is why we're doing
it.
But when he wrote it and published it, he then went and asked for a pay rise.
Yeah.
And he got turned down.
Yeah.
Like, not good enough.
Because... and I think history shows that this is a really important contribution.
Yes.
And maybe history proved that it was, whereas at the time no one could see.
Well, how would you know, right? It's only
That's
ever
right.
in retrospect.
And you know, like some crazy stuff in there is that, you know, like what he's talking about, you know, with the benefit of hindsight.
That's what I'm saying. You know,
he nailed it. You know,
We'll explain
in
why
terms
this is
of
the
their
case
principles.
in a minute. I mean, maybe not the whole book.
Not all of it,
summary
but
of this book
the big stuff
should be taught to high school kids
Yes.
today.
Yes.
So the notion of conspicuous consumption is that you use resources to signal your wealth. We know that. But you have to do it increasingly by buying goods which are useless.
Yes.
So they
or
become,
doing things that are useless.
Well, leisure is, that's why it says leisure class. And the point of the leisure is that you have to do things which are economically unproductive. And that analysis is so interesting. I'll come back to in a minute. He might have said reading books and talking about a podcast is
and sport.
He talks a lot about sport.
Yes.
But some of the examples I love, suntans. So when everybody worked in the field, when labourers worked outside, the way you signalled your wealth was by having pale skin. Right? So that's why there was lots of,
because that showed that you didn't work outside.
You didn't have to do any productive work.
That's right.
Now everybody works inside. The way you signal your wealth is by having a suntan, by showing you've got the leisure to go on holiday.
That's right.
Cats. He talks about cats. He thinks cats are because they're not as worthwhile. They're not as productive as dogs. They don't have jobs to do.
Oh, there'll be a lot of people there.
So my cat's got a great job to do. Yes, but assuming it's not a mouser, its job is just to make you feel.
Well, I can tell you for a fact that the third guest, my cat, his job is to judge us all day.
Okay. Well, the fact that you can afford to have an animal in your house who you feed and its single job is to rain down judgment on you. But the other one that I love, and I went down a rabbit hole and found a thesis about this. The rise of white business shirts.
Oh,
the reason business shirts are white is only people that could afford to think about how
to keep them white.
Think about what the world was like in 1890.
Wow.
You would have had to have somebody who would launder your shirts
starched.
on a regular basis. And you couldn't go outside.
That's right.
So the rise of the white business shirt is conspicuous consumption. High heels on women. Right? People wearing high heels. It's demonstrating they're not doing anything economically in 1890, economically productive.
Wow.
That once you start doing this lens, it becomes really, really interesting.
It's quite terrifying, actually.
And the other thing he says is the loop you get into is once the middle class start adopting those things, then the rich have to find something else to distinguish themselves. I really like that.
So this is that he's got some massive terms, which will come is a thing we'll talk more about, but pecuniary emulation. Pecuniary, I can't even say it. Pecuniary emulation.
Yes.
The struggle to gain wealth to prove your social status.
Yeah.
I think the second part is understandable.
Yeah, it becomes a signal, right?
Yeah. And conspicuous consumption. So we've got conspicuous leisure, consumption, standard of living, taste, dress.
Yeah. And so he does make a good point, doesn't he? That some people work really, really hard to make it look like they have lots of leisure time.
Yes.
Yeah. So he might say that having lots of books is a way of signaling how much leisure time you've got.
Jeez, Carl,
because what you don't show people is how hard you have to work to read all those books. Right?
Yeah.
There's a thing in economics called a Veblen good.
Right, yes.
And the Veblen good is the opposite of a normal economic good. So normally with an economic good, as the price rises, the demand decreases.
Yes.
But a Veblen good is as the price goes up, demand increases.
Ooh. So give us some modern day examples of that.
Designer goods.
Yes. So you're looking at your Gucci stores.
Expensive cars.
Yeah.
You know, like, so hypercars. McLaren, Aston Martin released a £2.8 million car, and they had a waiting list around the world for it. It's just unbelievable, right? But that's so interesting because these have become positional goods, and
that's the
they
key.
get valued by who has them and their position in society.
Yeah, and then who doesn't have them sees them as the measure of
Yeah.
success.
Which is, one of the things I've thought about,
Yeah.
and I think Veblen talks really well to this, is fake
Yeah,
designer brands. Like if you have a fake Rolex,
which is the world these days, isn't it?
You're signaling that you've
got a Rolex,
but you can't afford a Rolex, except it's fake.
But others don't.
Yeah. So, but who are you signaling to at that point? And how are you living with yourself?
Curious, isn't it?
Yeah, I love
Very
this stuff.
curious.
There's so much in this argument that is useful and relevant.
Yes, so we're talking about stuff that we would call signaling, virtue signaling, affluenza as a modern term.
I love all of that stuff.
all of those things.
Yeah.
But we're talking about it 1899.
Yeah. And he's talking about leisure. The interesting sociological perspective is how we would do that with busyness and hustle.
Right. Yes.
Which
we talked about in our last episode.
But even Bezos will make out that he works harder than anybody, gets up early, crushes the day.
Yes.
Like world's richest man. Like
Yes.
he's not signaling his leisure now.
He's now signaling his hustle.
Yeah. Okay, so all that's great. This book was a hell of a tough read.
Oh God.
So listen.
There's an understatement of the podcast.
Okay.
Yes.
So there's a couple of perspectives to this. One is I used to teach this.
Yeah.
Like 25 years ago, I used to teach this to my graduate students.
Yeah.
But I struggled with this book.
Oh, I tell you what I'm going to confess here.
Okay,
I
go on.
bailed out.
What? You didn't finish it?
I couldn't finish this book.
Well, I love your honesty. Look, it is long and it is tedious.
I got the gist of it.
Yeah. Let me give you an example.
God, yes. This is the way to show this book.
Okay.
Yeah.
This is just a sentence grabbed at random. It is not a constitutional difference of endowments in the aesthetic respect, but rather a difference in the code of reputability, which specifies what objects properly lie within the scope of honorific consumption.
What does that mean?
What does that mean? Like seriously, and that's one sentence at random, and it's all like that.
It's all That's the thing. It doesn't.
So,
however, I kept excusing myself a little bit.
Yeah.
And saying, is that how books were written in that time?
Okay, so that might be fair.
Yeah.
Although we've read some other books that have been written a long time ago that
true.
read much better.
True.
Than this. The example I always give is what's the Three Men in the Boat book? When the three men mess around in a boat, they go off.
Oh,
that was written in the 30s, and it feels to me like it was written yesterday. The real problem with the book, though, isn't its tediousness. The real problem is Veblen tries to explain everything.
Yeah.
And seriously, it's 400 pages long. It's 400 pages long. It's like, God, it's like a week of my life I'm never getting back. But I think 200 pages are about leisure class and consumption. And after that, so there's a really strange chapter called The Conservation of Archaic Traits, which is all about genetics and race.
Yes.
Which just is not dated very well at all. It argues essentially for class differences and temperaments based on upbringing, right? Awkward to read.
Yeah.
There's one about women, and chapter 13's about women and what the role of women in the world, which,
However,
yes.
One of the things that has been said about this book is that he was one of the forerunners of feminism.
Yes.
So he was calling out.
Yeah, no, he absolutely does. He does.
Which is crazy when you think about it.
Yeah, true.
And you think about that
he
time.
Does do it with
but your point is, it's over. Like, and once I got through, it's effectively a chapter on this, a chapter on that,
yes,
and so the first half, is it about the first half of the book is all around conspicuous consumption.
First 200
but
pages.
It's different forms of conspicuous consumption.
So the one that would have, if you got to it, the one that would have ripped you short, chapter 10 is the one about sport.
Yeah, I did jump to that.
About uselessness of sport. And he talks about Julie. Actually, Julie.
Yeah, but I mean, we are talking about a time, aren't we? And I get the uselessness of sport argument a little bit, but I don't think it's like... So this is where it just doesn't quite date.
Well,
it doesn't date well.
If we go back to the first point, right, he tries to explain everything, and he tries to explain everything. He draws on Darwin and Marx, and he basically says, the world's evolved from basically a struggle for survival. He talks a lot about that into a struggle for comfort, and then into a struggle for status, and that we're in that third part. And what does all that mean?
Yeah,
the one that is quite interesting is he goes after the church as conspicuous.
Yeah,
consumption.
no, this is a brave move.
I thought that was a brave move. If you think about a high church function, the things people are wearing, the fact they're signalling that they don't do any productive work.
Yeah, the tide, all that stuff.
The clothes they wear. So that's good.
So
the point at the beginning that we've created a world where the truly rich are exempt from productive work. Get it, love it to bits.
But I just want to. The reason why why I thought it was important to dwell on him and what happened in his life is that it does explain this book a little bit. Because
so that's a really good point.
Yeah.
One of the critiques about him is that his kind of Norwegian ancestry means that he had this austere upbringing, which means that he's looking from the outside.
Yeah. So that's right. So his upbringing is really important. Yeah. So you think of his, like working class, well, probably not even working class. So, the family had to fight and work really hard to get a life.
Yeah.
That was first, one of the, I think all the siblings went to college, didn't they? Right? One's a professor of physics.
I was going to say he ends up being a professor at the University of Chicago, doesn't he?
Yeah, but I mean, his brother was a professor of physics or something, and his sister was successful too. But the point being that he did his PhD and he spent 7 years unemployed, and I wonder why.
Yeah.
Because he holds, and I think this book is a great example. Yeah. He obviously is a massive thinker, no doubt.
Yeah.
Like I don't disagree. I don't disagree with the fact that these were big ideas. He's planted the seed of a whole new lens on economics. His contribution is massive. But if this book is an example of how he brought people along with him,
it might not have been the case in 1899. But if you think about how people's PhD thesis compares to the book they end up writing. The thesis is usually much more dense, much more theoretical.
Totally.
Imagine what his thesis would have been like.
Yeah, but I mean, this could be yes, it could be that time, but it's also you meet people who are, I'm not thinking of anyone, by the way, but, very dogmatic.
Yeah.
Very smart, and those two things together can be like a blunt instrument pounding.
I read something
people.
else that said he didn't have a whole lot of friends.
Yeah, well, if this was the dinner party conversation or the idle chit chat, you'd be going, "Can you chill out, mate?" I get what you're saying.
So two quick points, and then we can wrap up what we thought about it.
Yes.
I mean, he makes a really good anthropological point, which is all societies have conspicuous
totally.
And you think about the Chinook potlatch, which is, I didn't know this.
I didn't think of this, but
well, I
yes.
did, because
tell me more.
potlatch in the Chinook language means to give or gift.
Right, okay.
And the idea is if you're powerful in Chinook society, you give feasts.
You give.
And the feasts are massively over the top.
Yep.
Because it's not just about the giving, it's about the signaling that the giving gives.
Yes.
So other societies do it. The other thing I thought about, and I don't know if he mentions in the book because it was so long and tedious I've forgotten, but the thing in Darwin's life that drove him crazy was the peacock's tail.
Ah.
Yeah, because he hadn't really thought when he wrote.
Oh wow!
When he wrote The Origin of Species,
yeah.
he hadn't thought through sexual selection. That came later.
Yes.
And he said about the peacock's tail, the sight of a feather in a peacock's tail makes me feel sick. Because it's got no evolutionary value other than signaling.
Wow!
And so the point.
But that's true.
But the point being, a male peacock goes around with a great big tail, saying, "Look, I'm so fit and powerful and strong. I can carry around this useless tail."
Yeah.
Look.
And it's not through a physical act like other animals and all that kind of stuff. It's just this tail.
I've just got it. And listen, I'm still alive and I'm kicking ass, right?
Yeah.
So that tail becomes the Bugatti, the Louis Vuitton.
But peacocking is a term, isn't it?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
For that reason.
Yeah.
So, okay.
So we've got it's just fascinating talking about that, and then we're living in the time of the big, bold, beautiful bill, whatever. But but I just want to pick up one of the concepts which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
This belief in luck.
Yes.
And he really calls out the fact that this. Like luck is this thing that people who have a lot of wealth think they're really lucky.
Yes, of course.
Yes, there's a belief that this, but it completely ignores how it actually
Absolutely.
works, which we understand.
Well, think about the latest Dave McWilliams podcast, right? Saying rich people think in years and poor people think in weeks.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But I was thinking about this concept, and I thought, actually, this has also been translated into a belief in hard work.
Yes.
And this is maybe the shift that's happened in this time. So we're talking about, 1900, get wealthy. You talked about the kind of big holidays, and then you mentioned like Bezos, who gets up in the morning, wants to show that he's working hard. Like, I'm a wealthy man, but I work really hard for this.
Crushing the morning.
And so we've got this, the modern phenomenon is the belief in hard work.
Well, again,
And this I'm successful because I work hard.
look, I don't want to do this for 2 episodes in a row, but imagine a French theorist had written this.
Oh,
book.
totally.
This is about social mobility, right?
Totally.
And it's essentially about, in America, if you work hard enough, it's the American dream, you work hard enough, you too can be a robber baron. And some of those robber barons did come from pretty bloody poor backgrounds.
Yeah, true.
So,
and we're not saying that
but
wealth doesn't mean you've worked hard to get
But that's still
wealth.
survivorship bias, right?
Yes.
You're looking at the top 3. You
Yes.
don't see all the other people that worked really hard and didn't get rich.
Yeah.
A different tradition, maybe a French tradition, would talk about how do we use union movements to help, help people become socially mobile. How do we use education? How does the state play a role in that?
And that's the whole that upper strata.
Yeah.
There's a legacy from the upper strata
Absolutely.
that keeps the upper strata going, but then there's everyone else, isn't there?
Well,
And this is the time where it started to really
wealth and income.
Yeah.
We obsess
Yeah.
about income tax, but we're not very good at dealing with wealth tax. We can pick up all those points before.
Yes,
But
yes.
When I was reading this book, I was thinking a lot about type 1 and type 2 fun. So type 1 fun is the fun
good.
you're having
Yeah, good
while
call.
you're having it.
Yeah.
You're in the middle of the fun, you're having it. Type 2 fun is fun afterwards. I don't know what running a marathon's like, but, like sometimes, afterwards when you look back
definitely.
at type 2
Definitely
fun.
type 2 fun.
This book
Yep.
was type 2 fun. Like, it's an important book.
Yeah.
And I'm glad I read it again, but my God, it was hard.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you told me you bailed out. I just couldn't, knowing this podcast was coming.
Oh, I'm glad one of us read
But
it
I'll tell you,
again,
this is
but-
something really interesting. So I finished it. To get it done in time for this podcast, I was reading it in Ubers and I was reading it on aeroplanes. I was reading it everywhere I could.
Yes.
And when I finished it at the airport last week, I went and bought the latest Orphan X novel by Greg Hurwitz as a
Okay,
treat.
yeah, yeah.
That's also 400 pages long. I read that in a day.
Right.
You
Well,
know,
there's a contrast.
Yeah, like that was like a palate cleanser.
Yeah.
Whereas this felt like I was a grind.
And you needed a palate cleanser. Yeah. So
hold on,
where do we land on this? Important concepts.
Yeah.
100%. So important man,
Yeah, important book.
important book,
And
important
you made
ideas.
a really important point that we skipped around, which is how much of it is the world has changed so much in the last 20 years that reading books like this is hard for everybody, even those of us that read a lot and think deeply.
It's a good point because we're not used to reading a book
Yeah.
like this.
And we've talked
Yeah.
before about digital nutrition, like eat your greens.
yeah.
Is this a eat your greens book? Like, it's going to be tough. You're not going to like it, but it'll be good for you. It's like leg day. What do you think? I mean, you're the one that bailed out. What do you think?
I don't know. I don't know. It's very funny to sit and on our wonderful Unlocking Great Books
Yeah.
and say, I didn't really finish this book.
No, but I love that.
But I do think it's
like,
important.
Like,
to
even
know.
you couldn't get yourself to finish it, and you've been reading a lot of.
It got me thinking.
This is a man who, loved Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
But yeah.
Which is also some people think
Yes.
is a
Oh
deeply
no, I'd say
difficult
it is a big book too.
Okay.
But is it beyond my reading powers? I think maybe that's what it was. Is that where to your point before.
Yeah.
It's just it may be that I'm more used to reading books that aren't this dense.
Okay, well maybe that's where we end, right?
But that's fine.
This is a really important.
It did get me thinking, though. How can we balance the importance of this book, the importance of him and his ideas, and the accessibility of those ideas? And I thought, I wonder what else has been written. So there's an amazing book called Veblen, and a biography.
Yeah, I thought you were going to talk about the novel. Sorry.
Yes, but there's also the portable Veblen, which is a children's book.
No way.
About this concept written in 2016 by Elizabeth Mackenzie.
Wow.
And it did, I was thinking, geez, it'd be interesting to read that book and his biography. Because
or you could go to Mike Grimshaw's lecture about it.
Oh, that's true. Yeah, when does Grim? We should put that up.
Yeah, Grim, when's your lecture coming about Veblen and why Veblen matters in 2025?
Well,
but it's a good point.
Okay, we jest about that, but maybe we should try and get a recording of that.
But seriously, you know, what we're saying is this is a really important book that seems as pertinent now as it did.
Oh, no, totally.
Totally. There's some ideas. There are ideas here, and everybody's in
different examples, but principally the same idea.
But the book itself still remains impenetrable and tedious.
Yes.
And you know, it might defeat you. But hey, give it a nudge. See if you're tough enough.
Wow.
I don't mean that. It sounds like macho bullshit.
No. No. I mean, some people will read it. Yeah. I'm surprised that you found a book hard.
I found it. I mean, that surprised me.
I thought it was me.
No, it surprised me. It's twofold.
Yes.
One is this is a book that I teach, albeit to graduate students.
How do you feel about that now?
I'm struggling to come to terms with that.
Do you want to issue a formal apology?
Well, I suspect I would have given them chapters to read rather than the whole book. But I would have encouraged them to read the book, and I would have read the book at the time.
Yeah.
To be fair, I was reading a lot of dense sociology, so maybe it's context.
Yes.
But now, today, this book doesn't succeed for me.
No.
It's not a success.
No. And there's probably modern versions of these principles. There's a lot more written about this subject now, isn't there?
Yeah.
So, Okay. All right. So we will close the covers on the theory of leisure class.
Yeah.
And Thorstein.
And thank you for being honest and saying you didn't finish it, because I do wonder if people listen to this podcast and think those boys didn't read all those books. This is the first one.
I can 100% say I've read everything else we've done. But we're going to be honest. Yeah,
it gets a special mention, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, this is the point. We don't want to get all philosophical about our podcast, but the idea being that, this is a really interesting book to hold up against Carl Newport, which is why we paired those two books, because, completely different times.
Yeah.
But there's strands through all of this, and the only way we know that is by reading widely.
Yeah.
So,
no, good point. It's a great place to finish.
Yes. All right.
Good work.
Well, I didn't finish it. Good work to you, Carl.